Today, we enter the second day of our 3-day Passion ritual. Last night, after the ritual of washing and the stripping church of decoration, we left in silence into the night, into the darkness of Judas' betrayal. This morning, in light of New Day, we gather to listen, to witness to the repercussions of such betrayal. In this place, we gather around the labyrinth, an earthed and enacted place of pilgrimage. As we embody our walk with divine presence, wander its pathways, we discover something strange. We discover that we are our journey. Last night we enacted a ritual of hand washing. Yes, it is more usual to do foot washing, to emulate that beautiful act of humility and service and hospitality. Because hand washing gets associated with that nasty villain Pilate, who Matthew has literally washing his hands of responsibility. So we prefer not to ritually enact the refusal of justice and the abandonment of care. I want to ask you, as you listened to the Gospel today, to Mark's story of the Passion, what draws your attention? What drew your attention? Which character would you prefer to be? Are you drawn to the person of Jesus? Do you want to be as faithful as he is, or at least be willing to follow his example? Perhaps that we prefer to wash our feet at this time than the hands of one another tells us something. Or have you ever reflected, we're really happy to join the merry crowds on Palm Sunday, but we never enact the screaming crowds on the day of crucifixion. We never join that parade. Could it be that we look to Jesus, God with us? We look to Jesus so that we can learn from Jesus and be like Jesus. And we look away from the characters and the events in the story that act against that. We're prepped, if you like, to hear and to tell and to receive this narrative of Jesus' passion as a story that tells us of God, that tells us about God. And maybe that is because we expect that this is what the Bible does. It tells us about God. It reveals God to us. And therefore it follows that the more we understand God, the better we understand God, the better we can live correctly, know that we are acceptable, understand ourselves as accepted. However, Abraham Heschel, a Jewish theologian, suggests otherwise. What he suggests is the Bible is not primarily our human vision of God, but God's vision of us. Dealing with humans and what God asks of us, rather than with the nature of God. So let's think of the story we tell at the season again. What if we were to hear the story as one of what it is to be human? Of what God is asking of us, of being known and beloved of God. Mark's story of the crucifixion is quick and to the point. There is no shuffling from Caiaphas to Pilate to Herod to Pilate. There's no disciple Peter angst. Mark only needs Pilate. So let's have a look at Pilate in today's story, the one that we tend to turn from. Let's turn to him for a moment. It seems to me that Pilate sees things for what they are. He is amazed that Jesus does not argue for himself. He's amazed that he's silent in the face of all those accusations. And Pilate sees their motivation as jealous self-interest. So why on earth would Jesus not argue? Pilate does have power, of a sort, but his power is bound up with the crowd. It's bound up by the role and the tradition to the crowd. Seeking a reprieve for Jesus, we hear Pilate invoking that tradition, the annual releasing of a criminal, but he is bound to the outcome. So Barabbas is released and Jesus is sentenced to crucifixion. Pilate had power to act differently. He chose to satisfy the demands of the baying crowd rather than refuse them. The responsibility therefore slid. Somehow it wasn't his fault. So last night we had Judas. Today we have Pilate. One denied justice and one betrayed. And both are part of the story. God's story of what it is to be human, of what God asks of us. Both we absolutely have to have in this story. They are necessary. If Judas and Pilate and the crowd in this narrative we tell had not acted, had not spoken as they did, we would not tell the story. We would not have this story to tell. We might have another lovely story of God with us in creation, but it wouldn't be this one around which we gather. It wouldn't be a story that puts betrayal and self-interest and mocking denial and the refusal to act for justice front and centre. A story that includes the worst that we humans can do one to another and to that which brings us into being, the worst that we can do to that deep mystery in our heart, at the heart of this event we call life. At Easter, and not just at Easter and Holy Week, but all through our journey of faith, we are called, we feel called to follow, encouraged and urged to be and do, to emulate in thought and word and deed the way of Jesus. Our scripture that we have is woven through with rich stories of holy ones, eccentric fringe dwellers, irregular, and sometimes I think quite mad holy ones. And as we read our scriptures, we look out for them, as if we want to hear what they hear, as if we want to keep close company with the divine as they do. Because then we too, like them, we will enact justice and life will flourish and be celebrated as God's divine gift. At least we want our idea of holy blessedness in them. We may not want the cost of it, the outlier status, that we will no longer fit into the mainstream society bits. We might not want those bits. I think we do aspire to live a holy way. At least sometimes we do. And I think when we want to do that, we don't want to look too closely at how we actually are. Or rather, we recognise that we fall short, but it's part of our becoming. We're this now, but we'll get better. We'll become more like we're meant to be and less like we are. But if we're always hoping and striving to be what we're not, it means that we aren't here now. We aren't present to now, to the gift of life now, to this moment, of which there will never be another one. And so in the telling of our story in this moment, on this day, this is the moment we stop and we stare, aghast and heart-torn at our participation in putting God to death. The one who shows us who we are and who loves every single bit of what that reveals. This narrative that we tell is a narrative of life, of our life, of who we are. It is a narrative, as I've said, of betrayal and abandonment and denial and self-interest, of fickle crowds whose vehement cries lead to the crucifying of that which brings us to life. These things are in us. We bring this narrative to life. It's not somewhere over there back then. And until and unless we let this be true, consider how all these things are in us. Pay attention to how subtly and thoroughly they weave through us. We don't notice it or pay attention. How can they ever be unstitched? There is a curious irony at the heart of our passion story we tell. It was our human, fumbling, insistent, broken inconstancy that caused Jesus' death. Yet through this and because of this, Christ, the light of God with us, is revealed. We spend a whole lot of time covering over who we really are, especially the imperfections we perceive in ourselves. Perhaps this blinds us to the potential in being aware of and present to our inconstant and less than perfect selves. Because this opens up us to honest vulnerability to the one who loves us as we are, and all this reveals. Could it be that this narrative we tell, this narrative of hope in which this story we tell today is included, could this narrative be making the startling claim that living transparent to how we are, with all our imperfections, in fact, through our imperfections, this is how the living light of God with us is revealed. And if that's a bit religious, let's turn to the bard koan. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That is how the light gets in.